Daily transmission, the collapse that's being engineered. What you're about to hear is education, not instruction. You are responsible for your own choices. Check the show notes, the full legal disclaimer. You are not witnessing chaos. You are not experiencing random crisis. You're being consolidated. We're on the cusp of an engineered collapse to transfer what little you still own into the vaults of corrupt politicians, banksters, NGOs, and family offices, while you are far too busy surviving to resist. Right now, think about what you'd do in a real crisis. Try it for a second. Financial collapse, supply chain failure, grid shutdown, bank runs. Where would you go? What would you eat? How would you access your money? Who would you rely on? That vulnerability you feel, that's not paranoia. That's accurate threat assessment. Because that crisis isn't coming randomly. It's being engineered right now by the same people who profited from the last one. That's not conspiracy theory. That's 2026's planned consolidation, the systematic preparation for controlled collapse designed to eliminate independent business, seize assets at pennies on the dollar, and ensure that when the dust settles, 6 companies own everything and you own nothing. They call it a market correction in economic forecasts, but it's orchestrated transfer, deliberate destabilization timed for maximum extraction, where crisis becomes opportunity for those positioned to profit and catastrophe for everyone caught unprepared. Ancient conquest required armies. Now they just crash the system and buy the ruins. 2008 wasn't a failure of the system. It was the system working exactly as designed. Banks got bailouts. Homeowners got evictions. Wealth transferred upward by $4 trillion, while 10 million families lost homes that BlackRock then bought for 30 cents on the dollar. And now they're preparing to do it again, bigger. Commercial real estate is holding $2.9 trillion in debt coming due in 2026 and 2027, with $1.5 trillion worth less than their loan values. Banks know this. They're not calling the loans yet. They're waiting for coordinated collapse to trigger bailouts while seizing buildings in bulk. Regional banks hold $3.8 trillion in unrealized losses on bond portfolios, hidden by accounting tricks that expire in early 2026 when mark-to-market rules enforce reality. 200 plus regional banks become insolvent simultaneously, but the mergers are already negotiated in private. Corporate debt has ballooned to $13.7 trillion, with $5.2 trillion at junk status. But default rates remain mysteriously low, despite 40% of companies not generating enough cash to cover interest. They're being kept alive, deliberately, zombified until the controlled demolition. But here's what they're not reporting on the mainstream news. The same companies that bought 2008's ruins have raised record dry powder investment funds, totaling $3.7 trillion in cash, specifically designed for, quote, distressed asset acquisition, unquote. BlackRock's Strategic Opportunity Fund 13 raised $22.4 billion in 2024, their largest distressed fund ever. Apollo Global raised $48 billion for, quote, opportunistic strategies, unquote. KKR raised $19 billion for, quote, special situations, unquote. They're not predicting collapse. They're planning it. The leaked 2024 Citadel internal memo states, quote, optimal acquisition window opens when regional bank failures exceed 15% quarterly. Unemployment crosses 8%. And foreclosure inventory reaches critical mass. Models suggest any time between Q3 25 and Q1 2026. They have a date. They have a strategy. They're waiting. The playbook consolidates. First, create the conditions. Inflate asset prices beyond sustainability. Load corporations with unpayable debt. Ensure small businesses operate on razor margins where one shock means closure. Then, Trigger the crisis. Coordinate regulatory changes, interest rate spikes, supply disruptions, anything that creates simultaneous pressure across sectors, causing cascade failures. Finally, position for extraction. Have capital ready, acquisition targets identified, regulatory approve pre-negotiated. So when assets hit distressed points, you're the only buyer with money. Document the preparation happening right now. Small business lending is down 38% year over year despite strong demand. Banks aren't lending because they want failures. Healthy businesses can't get capital, will default, will sell cheap. This is pre-positioning through starvation. Commercial real estate loan extensions. Banks extending terms on unpayable debt rather than foreclosing. Warehousing the crisis until coordinated collapse allows bulk acquisition. Strategic reserve drawdowns. U.S. food reserves at lowest levels since 1980s. Grain stockpiles depleted. Strategic petroleum reserves drained, creating maximum vulnerability to supply shocks they can trigger. Bank consolidation acceleration. 465 bank mergers between 2020 and 2024, eliminating regional competition, ensuring fewer, larger entities control money supply when crisis hits. When regional banks fail, mega banks absorb them with federal assistance, concentration by design. Digital dollar infrastructure. Federal Reserve's FedNow system is operational. CBDC infrastructure tested. Regulatory framework ready, waiting for crisis to justify mandatory adoption where they control your money directly. But the consolidation runs deeper than finance. It's systematic across all critical systems. Food supply. 4 companies control 85% of beef profit processing. When supply shock hit, they're positioned to acquire remaining independent producers for nothing. Energy infrastructure, grid consolidation under private equity, ensuring that when transition happens, same entities maintain control through new subscription models. Healthcare networks, hospital mergers are accelerating. Independent practices closing at record rates, preparing for crisis that forces remaining independents to sell or close. Here's what they're not advertising. Coordinated collapse requires precise timing across multiple sectors. They need simultaneous pressure, real estate, banking, employment, supply chains, in order to trigger the cascade. If any sector stabilizes independently, the coordination breaks and collapse becomes chaotic, which is bad for them, rather than controlled, which is profitable for them. Their model assumes atomized sectors that don't coordinate counter responses. They are positioned for specific failure patterns. Unexpected resilience in any major sector disrupts the timeline and extraction efficiency. More critically, their dry powder funds are time limited. Most distressed funds have 5 to 7 year investment windows. Money raised in 2023 and 2024 must be deployed by 2028 to 2030 or gets returned to investors at losses. If the collapse doesn't happen on their timeline, they lose positioning. Additionally, their acquisition models assume specific price points. BlackRock's models work at 30 to 40% below peak prices. Above that, returns don't justify acquisition. Below that, assets are worthless. They need the collapse calibrated within a narrow range. This isn't speculation. It's in their investor presentations. BlackRock Real Estate Q4 2024 investor call, quote, opportunistic deployment requires market dislocations of 30 to 40% to generate target returns of 15 to 20% IRR, unquote. Translation, they need prices to fall exactly that much, no more, no less. What breaks their controlled collapse? Sector resilience through coordination. When independent businesses in threatened sectors coordinate mutual support, shared resources, collective bargaining with suppliers, regional lending cooperatives, they create stability that resists coordinated pressure. Here's an example. Independent grocery stores forming buying cooperatives match big box pricing. survive pressure that would kill them individually. Alternative infrastructure. Every parallel system, local currencies, time banks, mutual aid networks, community land trusts, food cooperatives, reduces dependence on systems they control. Collapse only works if you need what they're positioned to exclusively provide. Asset protection through collective ownership. When neighborhoods form land trust, workers buy their factories, tenants collectively purchase buildings. Assets can't be bought in bulk at distressed prices because there's no distressed seller. Information disruption. Their timeline requires surprise. When populations understand the pattern, prepare for specific shocks, position defensively, panic doesn't set in. Distress sales don't happen at scale. Prices don't crash to acquisition targets. Inform populations that prepare collectively, disrupt extraction efficiency. Tonight's action, 90 seconds, assess your exposure. List your critical dependencies. Number 1, food. How many days without grocery stores can you go? Number 2 is water. If the tap stops, then what? Number 3 is money. If banks close, can you access cash? Number 4 is energy. If the grid fails, how do you heat or cool? Next is medicine. If pharmacies close, what do you do? For each one, answer, how many days can I last independently? That number, that's your vulnerability window. That's how long you're dependent on systems they control. That's how much leverage they have over you during controlled collapse. Now ask, who in my immediate area share these vulnerabilities? Your neighbors are in the same situation. Your coworkers face the same exposure. Your community has the same dependencies. That shared vulnerability is either shared helplessness or the foundation for shared resilience. Controlled collapse requires isolated desperation where everyone sells individually to the only buyers with capital. Coordinated resilience means communities that prepare together, share resources during crisis, protect each other's assets, and present collective bargaining power to opportunistic buyers. One family selling their foreclosed home to BlackRock, there's no leverage. 20 families on the same block forming a land trust before foreclosure, BlackRock can't acquire the block. One worker losing their job in small business closure, desperation wages at Amazon. 50 workers collectively buying their closing employer, business continues, jobs protected. The mechanism exists. The vulnerability is documented. The choice is yours. Think about it for a few seconds. 1001, 1002, 1003, 1004, 1005. Do you feel the collapse approaching? Then feel the foundation solidify. That's solidity. It's the sound of coordination disrupting extraction. Expose the collapse they're planning, and you become unconsolidatable. George Monty, True Life Podcast. Tomorrow we unmask the identity they'll assign to track everything. I consent to nothing I haven't chosen. Stay prepared, stay coordinated. Do me a huge favor and share this with somebody that might find it interesting. I think we find ourselves in some pretty precarious times right now. The goal of this messaging is to keep people aware of what could be on the horizon. The less people, the more people understand the propaganda and the more people see the patterns, the less they fall victim to them. Thank you.